Okay, so today we're going out on a limb again. And just so you know, when I say going out on a limb, nothing serious. It's just a pattern I haven't tried before. We're going to be tying a green drake nymph. I have tied green drake dries before and fished them, but I've never done a nymph. And it looks like the dries are about ready to hatch where I like to go fishing. But for right now, the nymphs are going to be more active. So we're going to start out by putting quite a few thread wraps on, or wire wraps here. We're using a 0.050, then this is a size 12 in a long curved hook here. So we're going to start just by attaching some lead that will help us get this down in the water a little bit. Okay, so we've got our lead attached, and we've got this lovely little end here, and I'm actually just going to wiggle it, move it back and forth, and it will break off. Not exactly where I want it, so I'll get a crappy pair of scissors because I don't want to dull my good ones with lead, and we're going to go ahead and just snip that last little bit off there while we go ahead and throw our scissors in the garbage can. That's not something that I would advise you to do. So I've got this pushed clear up against the eye. The only reason I'm doing that is to get those wraps compacted. Then I'm going to draw it back because I'm going to want a little bit of space there between the lead and the eye of the hook. For thread today, we are going to turn to a brown, kind of a olive dun, almost a brown olive uni thread, 136 denier. It's a pretty big fly, so I'm not as concerned about buildup. And we're going to go ahead and start our thread right in front of that. We're going to start our thread right in front of that lead. And as usual, I'm going to push with my fingertip on the back, just to keep that from sliding too far back. And I'm just going to put a few thread wraps into place there. And then I can go ahead and throw in quite a few wraps back here behind. And that'll just keep this lead from kind of moving around on us a little bit. And we'll grab our scissors, or we can actually just do the old really cool way that I'm still working on, which is to just rip your thread right off the hook without using your scissors at all. So I'm building up a little bit of a dam behind, and then I'm just going to take some wraps kind of through the lead just to begin to get it a little bit covered up. And the fly will be a little bit tapered, but we've got quite a bit of material that we're going to tie in here in the back. Okay, so here we are, got our lead in place, we've got our wire attached, and we're just going to take some turns back down here to the back end of the hook. And we are, just like usual, I'll turn my vise a little bit from time to time just to make sure it's going where I want it. Try to take touching wraps, but it's not essential here. I do much better doing touching wraps if I've got a tag end attached, but I broke that off. You saw that a moment ago. So we're going to take that to about right there, and we're going to bring it back forward just a hair. And I want to be a little bit careful about building too much of a body here, or too much thickness here. And from here we're going to turn to the first material that we're going to use, and we're going to use it for tailing, and we're going to turn back to one of my favorites. Often very hard to find these days as well, but it's going to be Woodduck is what we're going to use for a tail here. The Woodduck always makes a really nice tail. I'm just going to go ahead and rip off the more fuzzy things because I want a pretty solid and stout tail here. And I'm going to take about 1/4 of an inch or so of those. You can see I've got those pulled up pretty much perpendicular, which is going to help us keep those tips on the Woodduck pretty well lined up. Then I'm going to pinch those tips here tight between my thumb and my forefinger, and what that's going to do is help keep that nice flat alignment on the top. So once I've got that wood duck feather in place, and I don't mind if they're kind of spread all over the place, that actually gives it a nice look. And in this particular case, we're going to use a relatively short tail. We're certainly not going to use a tail as long as this hook. This is an incredibly long hook. So I'm going to put them about where I want them. I'm going to pinch them in place as well as my hook, and I'm going to just take a wrap or two to secure that wood duck into place. And then I'm going to take a look and decide whether that's about where I want it or not. And in this particular case, that's going to work out just great for me. In the past, you've seen me wind all the way up to the front to get extra bulk. We're not going to do that here. We're going to want some extra bulk, just not right here. So now that we've got our tails in, and we've got the butt ends of our wood duck coming out here along the back end, the next material we're going to tie in, you can use emu. In this case, I am going to use kind of a grayish ostrich plume. It's going to make it a little bit more puffy than in some of the other versions that I've seen tied. Peacock curl, very delicate. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple of loose wraps just to get it in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and move that up a little bit, and then we're going to come back down because we do actually have a third material we're going to tie into our fly here. And for the next material, a lot of folks will use synthetic. I'm not a big fan necessarily of the synthetic quill. So I'm actually just going to grab some Nature Spirit, and I want a pretty nice dark olive because we're tying an olive drake. And there's my feather that you can see right there. And we are going to identify just one is all we need. And usually when I do this, I'll just take my scissors out and I will just carefully find one that I want. And I'm going to want as much length as possible. So I'm going to try to make this cut very close down here to the bottom. Once that cut is done, I should be able to just kind of stroke this up, and that one that I cut off is now going to come off. I am going to tie it with the dark side. You'll see that there's a dark side and a light side. The dark side is down here. I am going to tie the dark side in towards the bottom. This again is a fragile material. I do need to make some wraps to get me a little bit deeper, so I do want to make sure I have sufficient to do that, make it all the way up. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to kind of draw that back a little bit to give me a little bit more length. So now we've got a mess. So just get used to it. The mess is actually kind of fun, at least for me, and I'm going to be checking and see where we are with all of our materials and bring this thread back down around the bend of this particular hook. And that will just help us make sure the tails are where we want them and that the body begins where we want it. And then we're just going to bring our thread back up, more or less keeping those materials in place to behind where we tied in the lead. And we already have some thickness there, so we don't want to go too far over the top of that. At this point, I'm going to revert or turn upside down my vise. And we are going to start cleaning up a little bit. So we're going to get rid of the extra wood duck tail there. Here's our, let's see if we can tighten that up a little bit. Here is our ostrich curl or plume, and I'm going to cut it off. And there's not much showing for the quill, so I'm just going to go ahead and let that be right where it is. From here, because we're not using an incredibly light thread, we'll be able to build up a little bit of a taper. You can see we're a little bit thicker down back towards the back end of the hook, and that's the opposite of what we want with a taper. We want it to get a little bit thicker the more we move up towards the front of the hook. So I'm going to just plain and simply take some wraps, going down part way, not all of the way, because I'll be adding extra bulk right at the bend, which I don't want to do. I want my bulk to be up a little bit further up here. So right now it's just kind of maintenance where I am trying to build in a little bit of that taper as we work our way up to the eye of the hook, and this is going to be the abdomen of this this olive drake, green drake. And we're going to take it right up to on top of the lead here. So from here, I am going to go ahead and do what I do a lot, just because I find it easier, but I'm going to go ahead and throw in a thread wrap so I can use my bobbin cradle. And I am going to have to be very gentle with my next material, which is going to be my ostrich plume. A little bit, I'm going to pull up my bobbin cradle, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hang that over the edge so it's free and clear. I'm going to grab myself a pair of hackle pliers here like this that I'm going to connect to the very end of this peacock herl or peacock plume. So I'm not using my fingers to hold on to it. I'm actually going to be using some pliers, hackle pliers, to hold on to it. And again, this stuff is so very delicate. So I want it straight up so I get those fibers sticking up. But if I give that too much pressure whatsoever, that plume is just going to break itself right off. So this is learn and practice. And even with learning and practice, you're going to see that I'm going to end up breaking off. If not on this fly, you'll see me do it on others, especially when you're using the ostrich plume. So that's not quite where I want it, so I'm going to, you can always go backwards. I want these wraps to be pretty tight with one another. These are going to become the gills on this particular fly pattern. So I'm keeping my tension, but being very careful not to overdo it with the tension. And then I'm just going to slowly wrap my way up the shank of the hook. And you can see the nice puffiness that it's going to be adding here to our abdomen for this fly. And after we put on our, when we tie in our little piece of quill, you'll see that those gills start poking out a little bit. So I've got it about where I want it. I'm going to, at this point, tie this off. Again, keeping tension, but not too much. And I'm going to, thread is back here, herl is towards the eye of the hook, which means that each one of these wraps is going to go right over the top of that ostrich plume and lock it into place. So I'm wrapping over the top of it at this point. I don't need to do 500 wraps, but a few. And then I'm going to do a few more wraps back on this particular side of it as well. Once I finish that, I can open up my hackle pliers, put them back to where I can find them, and I will go ahead and come in, and we're going to go ahead and trim off the excess here of our ostrich plume. So then we do now have one ingredient remaining, which is going to be our piece of biot on our quill. And once again, I'm going to turn to my hackle pliers just like before. I'm going to connect those to the very, very end here. And again, similar to the peacock curl, even though these tend to be a little bit stronger, at the very beginning, they're not. You can see it gets narrow and fatter as we move up. But these first few turns, we want to avoid the hook point, but we don't want to crank down on it because this stuff will break right off, especially when we're down here at the end that is a lot more narrow and thin. I'm going to use wraps with some gaps in between it, and the goal here is that we want to have some of that peacock curl kind of poking through these individual wraps. And that is going to mimic, my thread's winding up, that's going to mimic the gills on this particular fly. Okay, so now here we are, we're pretty much up where we're going to end. I'm going to go ahead and again, just like I did before, keeping some tension on. If I let go of my hackle pliers right now, everything will come unwound, and I'll have the opportunity to do that all over again. I'm not overly happy with where that wrap ended up, and so you can always go backwards and do it again, which is just perfectly fine. Believe it or not, your hackle pliers have a reverse setting, so you can go backwards. Doesn't really, it's just your fingers going in reverse. And I'm going to make a couple of wraps in front of this too. I'm going to pinch my hackle pliers, let them go, they're free and clear. And with that, we're pretty solid when it comes to the abdomen of this green drake nymph. And I'm just going to use my scissors and cut off that little bit of extra right there. And from there, we're going to go grab our next material. But one thing that you'll find, there are a lot of uses for turkey, and we're going to be using this for a wing case. When you start getting down into this area here, on a turkey, they're very, very, very thick. In this particular case, we're going to want to grab some fibers that are closer to the top, and they'll usually be a lighter color like you'll see here. And those will actually, being a little bit thinner, they're going to help us make that wing case. So I'm just going to grab myself out, you know, maybe a 1/4 inch of that material, and I want to keep these pretty flat. I don't want them to bunch up too much because it's going to be my wing case. So here we are with our turkey, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tie this one in by the tips. I'm going to take a fairly loose wrap here because I don't want it to all pinch up on itself. I'm going to take a wrap or two here. My goal is to have this sort of wrap around the shank of the hook. When I put this in place, I'm going to want this hackle or this feather to be centered over the top of the hook. And from here I can actually, they're pretty stout, so I can actually just draw those fibers back until they're at least behind the eye of the hook, so that I don't need to do any trimming here. And we're just going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit and get those last fibers here up by the eye a little bit more tight in, flat, secure, just like so. We're going to be putting some dubbing on next, so it's going to cover most of that up. I do want this to taper down a little bit towards the eye. I don't want to crowd the eye for sure. So you'll note that I'm trying to build that taper in without going too far towards the eye of the hook here. From here, we're just going to go ahead and go on back, and we're going to grab some dubbing, and we're going to start building a nice thick thorax here. And for this, we're going to use, I want a really dark olive color here. So I'm going to just be using some Awesome Possum here, and I'm going to be using the dark olive. And I am going to come back to this material multiple times because we do have a lot of area to cover, and I do not want to put too much on. So we'll probably make 3, if not 4. We're going to put this on our thread, and we're going to dub it nice and tight. As usual, I do want to make sure I get a couple of really nice solid wraps right back here where that wing case is. And I'll tighten it a little bit as I work my way up. And we can already see we're running out, and it's not nearly as plump as I want anyway. So we're going to go ahead and reach in. We're going to grab another little bunch of this dark olive dubbing. So it's going to look about like that. And I'll lick my fingers. I'm admitting it now. Yes, I lick my fingers. And I'm going to dub that material onto our thread, so we have a nice dubbing rope here, and we're going to continue building that nice thick thorax here with that dubbing. And I think probably one more, and we should be done. We do want that. And again, we're going to do this nice dubbing rope here. Doing a little bit of dog leg on me, which means I'm not doing such a hot job with this, but I'm going to just come back over the top of our thorax here again to get that nice and thick thorax. And you'll note that I haven't done too much near the eye of the hook. We will start moving up in that direction. But I want to leave myself plenty of space to tie off a few more materials when I get done here. Okay, so here we go. We've got a nice thick olive thorax here. We've got our whip finisher in hand. And so we're going to go ahead and throw in a whip finish just to keep all of this into place. This is not finishing the fly. This is just kind of holding everything into place. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight. And then I'm going to put that right back where I found it. And then with that, we are going to go ahead and we're going to take our wing case and we're going to bring it over the top. And this is where you want to be a little bit careful because those feathers, those fibers are going to want to stand up on each other, and I don't want them to. I want this centered right over the top, but I want them nice and evenly spaced. So now that I've got them about where I want, I'm going to take some pretty firm thread wraps here, and then I'm going to pull this material back, and I'm going to put a few thread wraps in front just to make sure that we are nice and secure. And this gives us also another opportunity to kind of straighten that out. And then I'm just going to come in with my scissors here, and I want to cut this in here pretty tight. I don't want to leave a heck of a lot of extra. So I've got that kind of in there nice and tight. And we'll just clean up around the eye a little bit here. We do have one more material we're going to tie on. But before we get onto that, and then hopefully you're able to see this as I turn it towards the camera, that we've got a nice wing case where the fibers aren't overlaying one another. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and grab kind of a dubbing brush that looks like this. I have all sorts of varieties, and basically all we're doing here is we're going to try to make this body a little bit puffy, but I want it to be puffier moving towards the back of the fly. Don't go to town too much, because this stuff, especially this awesome possum, will come out really evenly, really well, and you don't want to have a billion pieces of it kind of popping out. But you can see now we're starting to get that buggy look. I've got a few fibers here that are much longer than I want them. I've got a fiber here in the back I'm going to take care of. I lost part of my wing case right there. I'm going to clip that off. And then I'm just going to survey a little bit, and that's looking about as buggy as I'm going to want this to be. The next ingredient we're going to And the final ingredient we're going to put on here is going to be some Hungarian partridge. I think I've mentioned that before. I have at least 2 skins of Hungarian partridge, and I love this stuff. Makes awesome legs. And in this case, we're going to be kind of doing it as a soft tackle fiber. I'll pull that out. You'll note that it looks a little bit different. It's got the white stripe on it. I'm going to grab it by the tip, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of stroke these fibers back, and then I'll just rip the fuzzy fibers right off of this feather, just like that. The next thing that we are going to do is we're going to reach down and grab a set of hackle pliers that we're going to use to clamp onto the very, very top of this stem, just like so. And now that those are in place with my stem, I can now stroke with my fingers these fibers back, which is exactly what I want it to do. From there, I can go ahead and release that from my hackle plier, and you'll notice I've got a really nice place to tie in now on my fly. So we're going to go ahead and let that little extra spot that we just created, it's going to, let's counter wrap our thread so it wraps back on us, and we're just going to secure that little bit of extra in right about there. And I'm just going to take a couple of thread wraps, getting it nice and tight, maybe pull it back a little bit and get a couple of wraps in front of it. And then I'm going to come in with my scissors, and I'm going to go ahead and trim what we just used to secure this, just so we clear out that eye a little bit. Something like that. We might take a turn. So we're going to do that. I'm going to pull my bobbin cradle back into position just like that. Going to reach back in, and I'm going to grab a hackle plier again that I'm going to use to grab the back end of this feather just like that. So you can see we made a nice little handle here. I'm going to pinch that into place. I'll hold that kind of straight up. Try to get as much spit on your fingers as possible. And I'm going to stroke those fibers back, and we're going to just take a turn, and then I'm going to continue that where I'm going to be stroking those fibers back, so they're going to be more likely to wrap towards the back of the hook. We're going to do one more, and now we're pretty much out of material there. We're now just on the stem itself. So we're going to go ahead and move our cradle out of place, but I'm going to keep the tension on that stem that's sitting there. I may pull it out a little bit just so that I make sure that I get these thread wraps over the top of that. So, you know, 2 or 3 really good thread wraps there. Plenty of space around the eye, just like I like. Take a few wraps there. From here, I can actually open my hackle pliers, and I can let them go. And I am going to circle back in with my scissors, and here's my stem. It stands out like a sore thumb because it's white. I'm going to take that all the way down. So there's hardly anything left. And from here, I want these to be stroked backwards. So I'm going to kind of pull them back with my fingers while I take a few thread wraps here, just like that. Okay, and so then we're going to go up towards the eye of the hook. Again, not crowding it because we want to be able to tie on our tippet. But when all is said and done, there we are. We're left with a really nice soft tackle wing on this particular pattern. I'm going to grab my whip finisher, and this time, yes, we are finishing the fly. So we're going to just take a few thread wraps here with our whip finisher. I'm going to pull that a little bit backwards to pull it nice and tight, not so tight that it's going to break off in my fingers. I'm going to circle right back in here now with my scissors. Green drakes are going to be hatching any time now. So if they're going to be hatching, then there are more than likely going to be some of the nymphs in the water as well. And so I can use this as a wet fly underwater until I can start seeing them hatch. And with that, there you have it. Here is a green drake nymph fly. So there you go. Give it a shot. I think you'll enjoy tying it.